These are no longer just scare tactics. Zelenskyy stated that Russia will move on Kyiv and Chernihiv. The Ukrainian armed forces in these regions are at full combat readiness. The oil refinery in Syzran was hit by a swarm of drones. Everything is on fire. And on the front in the Dnipropetrovsk region, a forced evacuation has been announced. There are a lot of bodies. Several Flamingos landed at the location of the Kadyrovites. Akhmat has been crushed.
Let's go back there again. Yeah, go ahead.
Dropped it, didn't tell.
Russian soldiers who refuse to go on the meat assault are being tied up and beaten with sticks. Putin will be replaced as early as this summer. The names of the candidates are already known. Z-bloggers are already speaking openly.
They've completely lost their minds.
Under Prigozhin, the FSB is planning to exhume his grave. A stab in the back. A court in Kazakhstan has allowed the forced recovery of $1.4 billion from Gazprom in favor of Ukraine. Russian nuclear warheads have been delivered to Belarus. NATO is threatening Russia with war if the Kremlin uses nuclear weapons against Ukraine. Russia is trying to prevent Pashinyan's party from winning the parliamentary elections in Armenia. They're even discussing his assassination. Hero of Ukraine and world sports legend Serhiy Bubka has a successful business in Russia. The collapse of Russia has already begun. Conflicts between ethnic minorities and migrants have reached a new level.
Are you Russian or something? I came here to work! To work!
Hello, my name is Yulia Kokan, and right now here are the main stories. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose touch with you. Across the vastness of YouTube. Russia once again wants to march on Kyiv. President Zelenskyy, in his traditional address, stated that the Russians are planning to break in from the territory of the Bryansk region and Belarus, in the direction of the Kyiv and Chernihiv regions.
What is happening now in the direction of the Belarusian and Bryansk regions? It is precisely from there that the Russians are considering scenarios for additional attacks on Ukraine, targeting the northern regions of our Chernihiv and Kyiv directions. Of course, we are already working on strengthening our defenses in that direction. There is a corresponding order for the military command, but separately we are also taking preventive measures.
In addition, mandatory evacuation has been announced in the Dnipropetrovsk region. This concerns all residents of the Chaplinsky and Shevchenkivsky districts. People are being asked to urgently leave the region as the threat of air attacks is increasing. But ours, despite everything, continue to hold back the enemy and even reclaim what is theirs. According to the Institute for the Study of War, the losses were shocking. Even the Kremlin and the armed forces of Ukraine have seized the initiative on the front. The armed forces of Ukraine have carried out a series of counterattacks in various areas of the theater of operations. In recent months, they have achieved their biggest victories on the battlefield. Since the Ukrainian incursion into the Kursk region in August 2024, the intensification of Ukrainian medium-range strikes on Russian logistics, military equipment and personnel since the beginning of 2026 has also diminished the ability of Russian forces to conduct offensive operations in the theater of operations. Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky noted that as of May 14th, the number of Ukrainian offensive actions exceeds the number of Russian offensive actions, which may indicate more active Ukrainian counterattacks. We have good news from Kharkiv. Our forces have completely cleared Kupiansk. As of May 18th, not a single group of Russian troops has been recorded in the city. Some occupiers who managed to remain in the city or tried to infiltrate were eliminated along with their defenders or taken prisoner. Operation Liquidation. SPS operators destroyed an enemy pilot training base, but let's go through everything in order. On the night of May 20th, drones from the first separate center for unmanned systems attacked the pilot training school of the Russian Academy of Rocket and Artillery Sciences in Nizhny Donetsk region.
Looks like we're heading there again. Yeah, go ahead.
I sent it, but she didn't say anything.
As a result of the brilliant special operation, 65 cadets from the Special Forces, the 78th Special Purpose Regiment, Seva Akhmat, and the head of the training center with the call sign Berry, who is a doctor of the Russian Academy of Rocket and Artillery Sciences, were eliminated. The number of wounded is being clarified. It is reported that the Russians set up 3 such centers in the occupied territories. Now only 2 remain. And right now, here's a video that will once again show and prove who the Russians really are. In reality, and how they never abandon or love their own.
Which one? To complete the mission? To clear the village?
A video has appeared on social media showing an occupier beating his own people with a huge club. You might ask what for? It's simple. These Russian soldiers in the video flatly refused to go on a meat grinder assault and to die for Putin's cause. That's why they got what they did. Well, what can I say? The Russian world has long had a well-known weakness for BDSM, even at the front. I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They hold the front and stand against a huge horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge everyone to support the armed forces of Ukraine. And if you don't have the means to support them financially, write words of encouragement to them in the comments. I know they are watching us. Additionally, some interesting news has come from the Kremlin amid dictator Putin's visit to China. The Telegram channel Kremlin Snuffbox reports that certain influential groups have sent a message to Serhiy Kiriyenko.
We managed to get acquainted with it, but to be honest, it is quite unexpected and directly related to presidential ambitions. It's no secret that Kiriyenko's team is actively working in elections across Russia, but he's not alone.
The Kremlin Snuffbox reports that Kiriyenko may be removed from Putin's short list of successors and provides the reason.
As we promised, we are revealing the details of the message delivered to Serhiy Kiriyenko from one of the security influence groups. The interlocutors briefly summarized the contents, and frankly speaking, it is surprising. Sergei Vladimirovich was made to understand that his results have been extremely unstable lately. This includes the international track and the situation in the new territories, particularly in Donbas, according to the source. In
the material, it is stated that one of the influential groups made it clear that in the event of losing the new territories or part of them, Kiriyenko can forget about any prospects of leading Russia after Putin. At the same time, it is well known that Kiriyenko's media team has prepared a special document that explains to Russians why the so-called special military operation can and even should be ended at a certain point.
There are rumors that it could be put into action as early as this fall. However, not all groups within the elite support this approach. There are also those who do not want to stop the war. It's surprising that someone dared to challenge Kiriyenko regarding the new territories. The issue also involves multi-billion budgets that the first deputy head of the presidential administration manages through his own people.
On their part, the Z supporters, they talk about the imminent collapse of the bunker dictator. According to them, Putin will abandon them as early as this year. For example, Z blogger Ilya Remeslo stated that dissatisfaction with the dictator is rapidly growing inside Russia, and the fight against him has already partially entered the public phase.
As before, I am confident that Putin will leave us this year, most likely in the fall.
Of course, Remeslo says what he was told to say, and the fact that he is free indicates that this criticism is planned and permitted. The question is, by whom and for what purpose? On social media, they write that right now in Russia, no one is satisfied with Putin. The elites, the security forces, the oligarchs, and the officials are all dissatisfied. For now, it is Putin who guarantees the stability of the system, while there is constant behind-the-scenes infighting among Russian clans and groups. Everyone already understands how bad Putin is for Russia, both inside the country and abroad. But as long as there is no successor who can play Putin's role, Putin continues to rule. But the system is starting to crack. Putin will not rule forever, that's for sure, but exactly when the change of power will happen is unknown. Everything will happen very quickly and suddenly, and perhaps very soon. On May 21st, Ukrainians congratulated Russia on Vyshyvanka Day with festive fireworks. The oil refinery in Syzran-Samara region smoked a little that night. Well, a little. See for yourself. Just so you understand, the distance from our border is more than 800 kilometers. This oil refinery has already been attacked several times by good drones. The last time was in December, when it had to suspend operations for a while. The annual processing capacity of this refinery is from 7 million to almost 9 million tons of oil per year. And here is one of the missiles, so to speak, with a leaflet bearing the inscription, Syzran. You sleep, we encode with symbols, getting used to the patterns of Ukraine on Vyshyvanka Day. As for me, the greeting turned out absolutely perfect. We congratulated them from the bottom of our hearts. Almost all major oil refineries in central Russia have been forced to halt or reduce fuel production after Ukrainian drone attacks in recent days. Reuters reports this, citing sources. Ukraine has intensified drone attacks on Russian energy infrastructure, doubling the number of refineries hit since the beginning of the year, according to various statements by Russian officials on social media. The strikes, which also targeted pipelines and storage facilities, have reduced oil production in Russia, the world's third largest producer after the United States and Saudi Arabia. This has increased pressure on Moscow's federal budget, where oil and gas taxes account for about a quarter of revenues. Among the refineries attacked are Kyiv in western Russia, Moscow refineries, as well as plants in Nizhny Novgorod, on the Volga, Ryazan and Yaroslavl. More details on how drone sanctions from the Hungarians work in our report. There is another commotion in Russia. This time, everyone is fussing over the situation around the refineries. As they say, Ukrainian long-range sanctions are in action.
It is oil that is the needle of Koshey, which in fact ultimately determines Russia's entire future.
Russians are especially worried about security issues around the refineries. This is reported by the Telegram channel Kremlin Snuffbox.
Sources in the government state that the security situation around oil refining facilities has significantly deteriorated over the past 2 months, and the trend since the beginning of the year is extremely troubling. The refineries continue to suffer. The supply of spare units has been exhausted or is nearly depleted. The units are complex, critical, and unfortunately the attacks are ongoing, says the source.
At the same time, sources close to the Kremlin claim that a fuel shortage in Russia will be avoided, at least for the next few months.
However, this is a task for the authorities, including local officials, who must already begin reducing consumption by non-critical enterprises. Civilians are advised not to stockpile fuel in advance in order to avoid a sharp increase in prices. However, under conditions of reduced production, price increases are almost inevitable.
Nevertheless, strikes on Russian oil and gas infrastructure and sanctions pressure have already created serious problems for Russia's economy.
All the revenue that Russia receives comes primarily from oil. Oil, petroleum products, and to a lesser extent gas, are what allow the Putin regime to exist, to buy weapons, to hire mercenaries, and to continue the war against Ukraine. And if, for example, Ukraine systematically targets Russian oil refining and oil transportation, which is what we are seeing now, then ultimately this will create a lot of problems for Russia. After all, this is rather complex equipment, which is not so easy to repair, and most importantly, it will require money. In other words, what is supposed to generate revenue will instead bring losses.
Just in the past few months, Russia has lost about 10% of its oil refining capacity.
In just these months, that's minus 10% of Russian oil refining. It is also important to note that Russian oil companies are being forced to shut down wells. This is even more significant. It's essential. To restore production at these wells, Russia needs to do significantly more than many other oil-producing countries, which shut down wells simply in response to market fluctuations. Russians can't do that. For them, losing production is truly very painful.
In addition, due to the comprehensive pressure on Russia, the Russian budget deficit for the first 5 months of the year has already exceeded the figures that Moscow had planned for the entire year. The Kremlin does have reserves to continue the war, but they are not unlimited.
Putin, of course, set aside money for the war, but certainly not enough to fight indefinitely. Every one of our retaliatory strikes, every step we take together with our partners, every step of pressure, all of this pushes Russia toward ending the war. Right now, they already have a significant number of regions in a state of bankruptcy, and Putin is leading Russia toward bankruptcy.
And Ukraine is not stopping there and continues to put pressure on the Russian economy and oil refining sector, and will keep doing so. And that's the right thing to do.
In Russia, the entire economy is basically just a few pipelines and a few dozen oil refineries. And all of them are large, all of them are huge, scattered across the entire territory of Russia. That is, it's impossible to fully cover them with air defense systems. If Ukraine systematically takes them out, sooner or later, both the spare parts and the money for repairs will run out, and ultimately the Russian economy will as well. Well, not that it will completely collapse, but a significant portion of the revenue will disappear. And that's in the context of the overall crisis in this very economy, which is the situation Putin has driven Russia into.
President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, for his part, has already stated the effectiveness of Ukraine's long-range strikes on Russian territory. And he made it clear that Ukraine plans to intensify such strikes and has already approved the corresponding plans for June.
Today, I approved our long-range plans for June, and we must creatively develop Ukrainian long-range sanctions, which demonstrated their strength in May. I am grateful to our soldiers for their accuracy.
Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many people watch us from Europe, Kazakhstan, Moldova, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are grateful to you for your support and proud that we have such reasonable viewers. Write under this episode where you are watching us from and whether people in your country support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments. And now let's continue with the most interesting part. This news is truly a stab in the back. Just listen to this. A court in Kazakhstan has allowed the forced recovery of $1.4 billion from Gazprom in favor of Naftogaz. The court of the Astana International Financial Center recognized the decision of the international arbitration and allowed its enforcement on the territory of Kazakhstan. Gazprom is obliged to pay the money for unpaid transit of Russian gas through Ukraine. Back in 2025, the international arbitration ordered the Russian company to pay about $1.4 billion. However, Moscow did not comply with the decision voluntarily. The situation was commented on by the chairman of the board of Naftogaz, Serhiy Koretsky.
The court in Kazakhstan has allowed the forced recovery of $1.4 billion from Gazprom in favor of Naftogaz, according to the decision of the international arbitration. This is the first public foreign court decision that allows for the forced enforcement of this arbitration award in a separate jurisdiction. We continue our systematic work to recover compensation from the Russian gas monopoly in accordance with the international arbitration decision. I thank the Naftogaz legal team for their professional and persistent work, step by step.
As for me, this is excellent news. Then what do you think about this? Write in the comments, I'll definitely read them. As they say, it hasn't even been a year, and the FSB is already getting closer to digging up the grave of the leader of Wagner PMC, Yevgeny Prigozhin. This was reported by the Telegram channel Kremlin Tabakerka.
We wrote that the FSB and other security forces are studying the question of whether he could still be alive, Yevgeny Prigozhin, and they do not rule out that to test this hypothesis they might dig up the grave of Yevgeny Viktorovich, exhume the body that is buried there. It seems such actions are now closer than ever.
It is reported that the reason was a Tsargrad article about a former Wagner member with the call sign Capsule, in which he expresses doubt that Prigozhin and Dmitry Utkin could have died together. In particular, the article states that Capsule pointed out that Utkin and Prigozhin were always apart. They would leave the bunkers separately for a smoke break so as not to present a double target. And this is one of the reasons why he does not believe that they could have died together on the same plane. They never even traveled in the same car. And even if they were in the same convoy, the cars would constantly switch places. Even less so. Kapsula believes the version that Prigozhin and Utkin were under the influence of substances on the plane and might have been tossing a grenade back and forth.
New information has emerged suggesting that Prigozhin may be alive and could pose a threat to Russia's stability. This information has not yet been verified, so I am not making any claims. A serious investigation is underway. We're trying to avoid exhumation, but more and more voices are saying that Prigozhin's grave needs to be dug up to get to the bottom of things. Maybe we'll do it somehow without making it public. Honestly, I don't know yet how that's even possible. There will be an outcry anyway. We hope that if we have to carry out an exhumation, society will take it in stride. After all, the situation is not simple, a source in the FSB told us. He did not provide any other details. At the same time, the Kremlin says they are aware of the investigation into Prigozhin and hope that the truth will definitely be established.
And what do you think? Is all this just speculation? Or could Prigozhin actually still be alive? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'll definitely read them. Russia has announced nuclear weapons exercises in Belarus, according to Bild. The article states that the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that, as part of large-scale maneuvers of its nuclear forces, Russia is practicing the use of nuclear weapons from the territory of Belarus.
According to the ministry, nuclear warheads were delivered to the field camps of a missile brigade on the country's territory. The missile unit stationed in Belarus, according to Moscow, was training to receive special munitions for the mobile tactical Iskander-M complex. The exercises also included loading munitions onto launchers and covertly moving them to the launch preparation area.
For his part, Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov stated that the Russian-Belarusian military nuclear exercises are a signal to Europe and NATO. NATO responded to this immediately. NATO spokesperson Arki Ryuta warned Russia against a nuclear strike on Ukraine. I quote, "If this happens, the reaction of the North Atlantic Alliance will be devastating." He also noted that NATO is closely monitoring Russia's nuclear exercises, which began on May 19th. Let me remind you, Russia deployed tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus after reaching an agreement with Minsk in 2023. Belarus remains one of Moscow's closest allies and borders not only Ukraine, but also NATO countries, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. The exercises, as previously stated by Moscow and Minsk, were supposed to conclude on May 21st. And what do you think about all these new drills and Russia's nuclear intimidation? Write your thoughts, don't hold back in the comments. Unexpectedly, Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz made a sharp statement during a press conference in Estonia regarding Ukrainian drones that stray and violate the airspace of other countries. This was reported by Reuters. The article states that Kosiniak-Kamysz believes Ukraine should use drones more precisely when carrying out strikes, deeper into Russian territory. Quoting, "Ukraine must be very precise when using drones to avoid Russian interference in their flight paths. Of course, Ukraine should be more cautious here so as not to give Russia grounds for provocations." The Polish Minister of Defense also emphasized that the territories of the Baltic countries must not be violated and should not be put at risk. Earlier, Lithuanian Defense Minister Robertas Kaunas confirmed that the drone which crashed and was found on the evening of May 17th in the Utin district belonged to Ukraine. According to the minister, the drone that entered the country's airspace had veered off course. And what do you think about the statements made by the Poles and Lithuanians? Russia is trying to prevent the victory of the party in Armenia's parliamentary elections. Civil Contract, the party of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, who has taken a course toward closer ties with the European Union and the United States. To this end, the Kremlin has launched an information campaign against the politician, according to The Insider. And well-known blogger Mark Fagin does not rule out that the Kremlin might attempt to kill Pashinyan. Here are the details.
Russia is launching a political and an attack on Armenia. Against the backdrop of Yerevan's rapid rapprochement with the European Union, the Kremlin is trying by any means to prevent Nikol Pashinyan's team from being re-elected in the parliamentary elections. June 7th.
As for Armenia's plans to join the European Union, this of course requires special consideration. This is a serious issue. Therefore, there is no need to push things to the extreme.
According to an investigation by The Insider, a large-scale influence operation against the Armenian Prime Minister was launched in Moscow. After setbacks in Moldova and Hungary, the Kremlin focused specifically on Armenia, a country that is increasingly distancing itself from Russia and seeking support in the West.
Armenia has become a link between Europe and Asia. The European Union is an important long-term partner for Armenia and the entire region.
To coordinate these efforts, the administration of the President of the Russian Federation even created a new department, the Department for Strategic Partnership and Cooperation. It is headed by Vadim Titov, a member of Sergei Kiryenko's team. The Armenian direction is overseen by officials with experience working in the special services and structures of the GRU and FSB. According to the publication, Russian state funds, organizations, soft power structures, Rosotrudnichestvo, as well as pro-Kremlin analytical centers and political organizations have been mobilized against Pashinyan. It seems that the Russian dictator is seriously concerned about the intentions.
This is largely attributed to the administration of Nikol Pashinyan, the Prime Minister of Armenia, whose leadership has been defined by significant political shifts and ongoing challenges within the region.
The main goal is to convince Armenian society that moving toward Europe is dangerous and that the country's future is only possible in alliance with Russia. All of this is happening against the backdrop of a sharp cooling in relations between Yerevan and Moscow.
It has decreased now. Last year and the year before it was higher, much more, but still $7 billion by 2025. And in my opinion, it would be right, it is essential, both in relation to the citizens of Armenia and to us, as the main strategic economic partner, to make a definitive decision as soon as possible.
In recent months, Armenia has significantly intensified its contacts with the European Union. At the beginning of May, the European Political Community Summit and the EU-Armenia Summit were held in Yerevan. As a result of the meeting, a joint declaration consisting of 44 points was signed, which Brussels called a historic milestone in relations with Armenia.
When we fully align ourselves with EU standards, we will have two options: to be accepted into the EU or not. And it is the European Union that will have to make this decision. We do not know yet. It is possible that the EU may decide not to expand further for one reason or another. But if we are accepted into the EU as a member state, we will be glad and happy.
She stated that Armenia's Crossroads of Peace initiative could turn the country into an important logistical bridge between Europe, the South Caucasus, and Central Asia. Nikol Pashinyan himself called these events historic for the entire country. Against this backdrop, Vladimir Putin publicly warned Armenia about the consequences of possible European integration. The Russian tyrant stated that if Yerevan chooses the path of joining the EU, Moscow will have to reconsider its relations with Armenia.
You see, this is what we are experiencing right now. Everything that is happening on the Ukrainian front. But how did it all start? With Ukraine's accession or attempt to join. The European Union? That was just the first stage, only the first stage. Even then, we started discussing it with the Europeans. We told them, listen, the phytosanitary standards are completely different. In your countries, in the European Union, and in Russia. All of this eventually led to a coup d'etat, the Crimean story, the position of southeastern Ukraine, and to military actions. That's what it all led to. This is a serious issue.
In addition to political pressure, the Kremlin reminds Armenia of its dependence on the Russian market, trade, and participation in the Eurasian Economic Union. Meanwhile, Pashinyan is demonstratively distancing himself from Moscow. The Armenian Prime Minister refused to go to Russia for the May 9th parade. He cited the election campaign as the reason. Parliamentary elections in Armenia are now becoming not just an internal vote. In fact, it is a matter of choosing the country's geopolitical course, either continuing an alliance with Russia or moving toward Europe.
The hero of Ukraine and world sports legend Serhiy Bubka has a successful business in Russia. Bubka also did not leave his mansion in occupied Crimea, but instead officially legalized it under Russian law. Thus, the Bubka family's business is not just operating, but rapidly growing wealthier. This was the subject of an investigation by Toronto Television. He is the official co-owner of 3 Russian companies in Donetsk. The companies are Amonblan, LLC, Avgust, and the Serhiy Bubka Sports Club. This fact was uncovered in 2023 by investigators from Bihus.info. His main partner is his older brother, Vasily Bubka. The companies trade directly with the occupiers. At that time, the athlete recorded a video message, assuring that he had nothing to do with business in the occupied territories. However, leaked Russian tax databases obtained by journalists contradict Bubka's statements. The documents clearly record the accrual of personal income. Serhiy Nazarovich received payments from the Montblanc company throughout the entire year of 2023. In total, Bubka was credited with more than 1,100,000 rubles in personal income. From this amount, he paid 15% tax directly to the Russian budget. And after that high-profile investigation, it turned out that the revenue of the Montblanc company, which supplies vehicles for the Russian treasury and DNR militants, increased by a quarter in 2025 and exceeded 328 million rubles. The profits of the August company jumped by 223%, even though not a single employee is officially registered there. The family's sources of income ranged from trade and real estate to baking bread under the brand of Serhiy Bubka's Sports Club. And interestingly, as of May 26th, Serhiy Bubka still retains the highest state honors and titles. Hero of Ukraine, the Order of Prince Yaroslav the Wise, and the Order of Freedom. What do you think about that? Leave your comments. The collapse of Russia has already begun. Conflicts among ethnic minorities and migrants have reached a new level. We will tell and show you all the details in the following report. The collapse of Russia is near.
To respond to the challenges of the times, Russia must be what? Strong. We keep talking about this with you face to face, time and again.
But these conversations won't lead to anything anymore. Putin is losing power and trust. A coup in Moscow is inevitable. The conflict between locals and migrants in Russia is escalating.
I'm a Russian doctor. I'm seeing patients.
Well, I'm a district doctor.
If you don't agree with this, you can transfer and find yourself a Russian district doctor like you want.
Yes, indeed.
Of course, naturally, I'm Chechen, and
Your people. I understand everything.
grasp it all.
What, are you raising us like at a military factory or something? And how do you feel?
About Russians. How do I feel about Russians? Like this. Well, how? I'm Russian. I'm asking, do you work here?
Russians and all Russians are Russians!
Well, if that's what you want, you can understand this question. Why can't I work wherever I want?
And why don't you live in your own Chechnya?
Social networks are overflowing with news about clashes, and Russians are increasingly expressing their dissatisfaction with the current situation in the country.
A migrant is taking a Russian citizen's job.
The Kremlin's anti-migration policy is only getting stronger, and it is precisely people from Central Asia who have come under the greatest pressure.
Where did you come to? Where are you staying? And you came here to work? I came here to work for... Don't open it.
All right.
You're a slave to the Russians. You couldn't find anything in Uzbekistan, so you came here. I said it wrong to you, but there's nothing in Uzbekistan. So you came here?
Non-Russians must leave.
My fellow citizens of this great nation.
Can we stay? You stay. Are you Russian?
The incitement of xenophobia is happening against the backdrop of a severe labor shortage in Russia. About 83% of Russian companies report a lack of personnel. The fall of the ruble, everyday life. Racism and strict inspections have led to a 10% decrease in the number of migrants in recent years. As a result, a vicious circle persists in society. Russian businesses are demanding the return of workers to keep the economy afloat. Meanwhile, the local population and law enforcement are calling for further expulsion of foreigners.
First of all, Russians often confuse migrants with their own fellow citizens who have a different skin color or different eye shape. Very often they don't realize that, for example, a resident of Buryatia or Tuva is also Russian. And that's not even mentioning the residents of the republics of the North Caucasus, whom for some reason some Russians consider to be foreigners.
Russia is tightening its migration policy. The State Duma is passing a law that allows law enforcement to deport migrants without a court decision. And Russian officials at various levels are constantly talking about the harm caused by illegal immigrants.
The state is waging a war, and in order to wage war, they need people to hate someone else. And not those people at the head of the state who started this war. That's why they try to redirect this hatred, sometimes toward Ukrainians, sometimes toward migrants, whoever happens to be convenient.
Redirect hatred and impose obligations. Russia is intensifying the forced recruitment of migrants into the army. But the patience of migrants may eventually run out. Earlier, Ruslan Kutayev, a Chechen public figure, had already warned the Russian government about a coup in Moscow.
When the time comes to act in Russia, we will act. And only with our approval will the government that will rule Russia be established. Only with us. Because Russia has its traditions. Whoever takes the capital takes the country. And in the capital, no one will govern and no one will come to power without coordinating with us. And we can say this with confidence, because we have grounds for this.
Although the information space is overflowing with rumors about an imminent change of power, there are currently no real signs of an immediate coup in Russia. However, one should not ignore the critical mass of negative factors: prolonged military miscalculations, systemic corruption, and economic decline. It is precisely these factors, together with a hidden split among the elites, that form a solid foundation for the upcoming political destabilization.
But when this will happen is extremely difficult to say. I would still really strongly associate this situation. This very real possibility, yes, of a significant escalation, a certain internal escalation of these complex processes, with the eventual passing of Vladimir Putin, or perhaps with some other kind of major operations regarding his overthrow, palace coups, or successors. As the prevalence of these various factors continues to grow, it is increasingly certain that the southern ethnic groups will begin to assert their influence and truly start to make their voices heard.
A crisis in Russia could flare up at any moment. And will Putin be able to hold on to power then? The question remains open. If not Ukrainian conscripts, then foreign citizens, as Ukrainian military journalist Yuri Butusov stated, there is a line of foreigners waiting to come to Ukraine who are ready to fight on the same terms as Ukrainians. In
2026, about 500 volunteers were brought into Ukraine who are now part of the 23rd Assault Regiment Kartia, and about 400 volunteers who, through Zaporizhzhia, joined the units operating there. The waiting list of such volunteers for just the 23rd Assault Regiment numbers more than 1,200 people who are saying, Ukrainians, give us tickets, help us with documents, and we'll fly out tomorrow to fight for you.
Butusov also draws attention to the fact that our mobilization efforts have not been entirely successful.
These people don't need to be caught on the street. They fight under the same conditions as Ukrainian soldiers. It turns out that with a salary of $3,000 in a world where more than 8 billion people live, you can find tens of thousands of people willing to participate in the war and ready to defend Ukraine. And
what are your thoughts on this? Write to us. That's all for now. Give this video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss the next episodes. See you next time.